Everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Randy Horton. I'm the Chief Solutions Officer at Orthogonal. Very quickly about Orthogonal, we are a software development consulting firm that helps companies accelerate the development of medical device software. As we say, all the software that's part of a device, unless it's inside a device. And the way we help accelerate software as a medical device, connected systems, and digital therapeutics is by taking the best of modern software engineering and product management and fusing them with MedTech's focus on safety and effectiveness in a way that really doesn't just make better devices, but makes safer and more effective devices faster than ever before. Some of you, I think, are repeat attendees for some of our webinars. We do these about once a month to really try and bring together thought leaders in the industry and share interesting new ideas. We're very interested orthogonal in today's topic because I think we're big believers in the concepts of being able to demonstrate good and quality in medtech and looking for new and better ways to do it. And we're personally vested in this because in order to do that, a company's got to have a really good software organization. You can't have a lousy software organization and do a good job of demonstrating quality and effectiveness. So it's certainly in our best interest as well as anybody who's a patient, for this to happen. We're really excited about today's webinar. We always try and partner with other organizations. This is our first time partnering with the Digital Medicine Society. So it's sort of a first time caller, long time listener thing. We're thrilled to have we'll let everybody introduce themselves, but they've been doing tons of great initiatives for years now. I saw it's the 5-year anniversary. Congratulations. We forgot a birthday cake, but we'll get it afterwards. But just all kinds of amazing things have come out of Diamond. I think Jen will explain some of those. But this was an opportunity where here's how I would put it. I think Dime's solving a really important problem, Rao. I don't know that Orthogonal is prepared to say everybody needs to go out and do this, but we are prepared to say everybody needs to pay some serious attention to what you're about to hear today and look at it because I think they're addressing some really important topics. And we're really glad to share kind of not just something about this initiative, but kind of put a medtech lens on it. We will have you in and out of here in 50 minutes. That's our promise to you. However, if you have additional questions, we can stay on for longer, up to 90. Usually we end up at about 75 or 80, but it really depends. But we are available to stick around, or at least I believe most of us are. We'll try and pack as much as we can in today. And our goal is really for you to leave some actionable gold nuggets. So you get a high understanding of the DIME seal and the domains, how it relates to medical device software, and really a strategy for thinking about, well, what could I do with this? What could my company do with this next? Is there something we could take away from this to get started on, presumably after the new year? We do welcome your brutally candid feedback, and we will reach out to you for feedback on the webinar because we really like to hear. We always try to make these better. And obviously reach out to anybody on this panel if you hear anything interesting from them that you want to know more about personally. Membership at Dime, Orthogonal Services, Validic. Samir, you could sell something. I'm not sure exactly what it is. You've got a lot of your fingers in a lot of pies, so we'll get to that. So with all of that, I'm going to ask each of today's speakers to introduce themselves. Why don't we start, Jen, if you could introduce yourself and also just give a little bit of an overview about Dime.
Yeah, of course, happy to do it. And thank you so much for hosting us today, Randy and Bernard. It's always an honor to partner with you guys at Orthogonal. And I really is a privilege to have Drew and Samir here as well, both great friends of mine and, leaders in the field doing great work and, tremendous partners of Dime over the last few years. So really excited for today's discussion. My name's Jen Goldsack. I'm the founder and CEO here at the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. And for folks who don't know us, we are a global nonprofit. Our mission is to advance the safe, effective, and ethical use of digital technologies to redefine healthcare and improve lives. Now, Randy, you said just a little thumbnail. I think that mission is what gets our team out of bed every day, but it doesn't actually tell you that much about what it is we do. So here's how Dime sort of sits in the market. I think the most important thing is we aren't tech enthusiasts at Dime, but we aren't tech determinists. So we aren't here to think about shoehorning digital technologies into every nook and cranny of healthcare and then saying, well, aren't we clever? We think much more about, look, there are pressing and persistent challenges in our healthcare environment that we have been working at for decades in many cases, and we haven't been able to move the needle on. Affordability for individuals and society, access, equity, outcomes that are commensurate with our spending, outcomes when someone gets a diagnosis and there's still no treatment or cure. These are the problems that are persistent in our field. Clinician experience as well, we mustn't forget that. There are now these powerful new digital tools in the toolbox. how can we actually leverage these to move the needle on these pressing and persistent challenges? And the way that Dime works is to say, there are some considerations, some challenges as we move towards the digitization of healthcare, the last big industry to be digitized, that are true business issues, and business has to take care of that. As we create a new sector within a very large, complex environment, there are also things that we need our legislative colleagues and our regulatory colleagues to do through new policy making and rulemaking. But there's a big gap in between where we have to collectively decide what's our North Star? What are we even driving towards? Where we have to establish a shared common language across new stakeholder groups, where we have to actually decide together what good looks like in terms of evidence in an industry that is an evidence-based field. We have to think about the right implementation science so that everyone who can benefit from these solutions can actually do so. And we also have to think about alignment of incentives. And so Dime's work is really at the heart of that, bringing leaders in the field together like Validic, like Orthogonal, like our colleagues at the American Osteopathic Association, which is one of the hats that Samir wears. This is where we get the work done. This is where we create a market as healthcare digitizes that actually works for the patients the industry exists to serve.
Randy, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Jen. Samir, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. Great to see everyone on this, and thanks for letting me be part of this super important conversation. So I do wear a couple different hats. So first and foremost, I'm a family medicine clinician in practice now for about 5 years, working at 2 different clinical models. One is sort of the longevity focused concierge model, working in a very tech-enabled, biometric-enabled, kind of futuristic setting, which I love. Aiming to increase folks' quality of life through very personalized, tailored medical approaches. So that's in a group called Rebel Health Alliance. I'm one of the docs there. I'm also, in clinic about once or twice a week at a clinic called Kramer Davis Health, which is a value-based care model for patients with intellectual and developmental disabilities, a very marginalized, underserved population that is honestly forgotten most of the time as it relates to innovations in health tech and healthcare models. So it's kind of my personal mission to bring what I see in the tech sphere of things. I've also been a serial entrepreneur in the past as well, but to bring what's happening at that layer to the folks who see it last, sadly. So I'm the medical department head at Kramer Davis. Because equity is at such a center of what I do and addressing the root cause upstream social determinants. I also run a startup called Forward Slash, where we are building housing first and social first models of care, really enabling community-based organizations and nonprofits who are non-clinical to work in sort of the Medicaid value chain in value type contracts, really for the first time. And that's a pretty exciting work across a couple of different states: West Virginia, Kentucky, Washington, California. And then, as Jay mentioned, I sit on the board of the American Osteopathic Information Associations. I'm an osteopathic physician. And so this is sort of the gatekeeper, if you will, to the over 100,000 osteopathic physicians, of over 40,000 medical students, and really representing how we present technology that is vetted, trusted to them as they start to procure these technologies for their patients in a very holistic, preventative, sort of upstream way that the osteopathic philosophy stands for. Great to be here.
Is that all, Samir? You don't have anything else you do with your spare time?
Sometimes I play volleyball, I guess, but.
All right, very good. Drew.
Actually.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Well, it's really great to be here. Jen and Samir are both longtime digital health friends, and so it's really awesome to be sharing the virtual stage with them. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Validic. Validic is the largest, most awarded health IoT platform, where we connect data from approaching 600 disparate sources from personal health data that people capture in their daily lives, everything from blood pressure monitors, weight scales, wearables, CGM, glucose monitors, pulse oximeters, thermometers, health apps in the phone, like you name it. We standardize and normalize it and bring it into our application for utilization into healthcare for healthcare purposes. And there's 2 primary use cases. So one being health incentive programs. So we power a lot of health engagement solutions for direct to consumer or direct to health plan member programs. as well as the second primary use case is disease management programs. And so for that, we actually have taken our solution and built an application layer that goes inside of the EHR clinical workflow. We have pattern integrations into Epic and Cerner or Oracle Health, where in the same way that a clinician would order a lab, where they're in the patient chart, they select the tab, they order, they click on the lab they want. The results are sent to the sample sent to the lab. The results are sent to the in-basket. The clinician types notes into the patient chart. We enable that same workflow for personal health data. So really enabling it as a first-class citizen of the EHR. And so we've been really fortunate to work with Dime, actually, and we'll talk more about this, but to help get some additional recognition for the work that we put into that platform. I'm also on the Consumer Technology Association Health Division Board, as well as the Highmark Health Technology Advisory Group.
Thank you. Welcome. And Bernhard.
Hi, Bernhard Kappa. I'm the CEO of Orthogonal. We are all about using fast feedback loops within the medical device space and really expanding digital ecosystems for the medical devices. So, integrations into things like Validic, into the EMR are part of that. But there is so much value that can be generated by being sort of digital citizens for medical device companies. We're pretty excited about this area because I think there is sort of a lot of priority really, placed just on getting through FDA and sort of dealing with a minimum of what is necessary. And the reality is that if you actually want people to use the systems, you've got to make it a lot easier for folks. And I think things like the Dime Seal kind of provide a roadmap for those types of things. So very excited about where we are here and looking forward to our conversation.
Great. So maybe just a little bit of context for this. There's a term in popular culture, somebody selling snake oil, like are they a huckster? But that actually comes from a real thing, right? People actually sold these concoctions 100, 200 years ago, today sometimes, that just claim to have all these medical benefits without any proof. Actually, there's a fascinating, we can post the link afterwards. There's a guy named Dr. Morris Fishbein who in the 1920s and 30s had a column in the AMA journal or whatever, where he talked about hucksters. And there was this one, it was a medical device called the Abrams box, but I'll put medical devices in quotes because it just made the most ridiculous claims that everybody in science of the day said this is just absolutely, he could tell what religion you were by looking at your blood, like doing like a magnetic test on your blood, it was just inane stuff like that. But it's still around. By the way, Samir, I apologize, but he actually did have a long screen on osteopathy. So it was an allopathic screen on osteopathy. I think we've kind of put that behind us. That one doesn't hold up as well. But it gets to this problem we have, which is that what works, what is good, and then what's good relative to the cost or the risks. It's an ongoing problem in healthcare. And digital healthcare seems to have uncorked another whole can of worms on it. And now I'll put it into three categories of people. I think there's people who are smart people doing good work who are generally trying, but measuring good is really, really hard in this industry, like ridiculously so. So you could even try to do well and not do great work inadvertently just because you actually make an error or you don't think of something. There's people who are jumping into this space who are not have a background on thinking about what is good in healthcare, and they're just trying to do the right thing, but they don't realize that they're actually like, stepping over 80 years, 100 years of knowledge and progress and just kind of leaving it all behind. And then you have people who are genuinely selling snake oil and don't care what they do. They're just trying to make money and hype, right? And if you go to like the HLTH conference, I think you'll find people in all three buckets, candidly. So it's kind of into this situation that Dime has stepped forward with, I think, a really interesting solution. So I guess we'd start with, could you talk a little bit about the seal, the background, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Kind of what was the what's the gap you're filling here?
Randy, happy to do that. I do want to just dig in though first, because you highlight, I think those three categories are really interesting. I also think, you highlight some challenges with digital health, but I also don't want to vilify the sort of digital health community unnecessarily, right? Unfortunately, we still see women getting, radical bilateral mastectomies all around the country, which at this point, based on the evidence, is frankly akin to assault and battery, right? We still see people having all of these back surgeries, and I don't know anyone who's got in for a back surgery that's come out better than they went in. There's plenty of things that we do in the practice of medicine. There are plenty of molecules, there are plenty of traditional medical devices that may not meet the caliber that we would want for ourselves or for a loved one. And you hit the nail on the head when you talk about the digitization of all of this, which is there's asymmetric information at a new level that we haven't seen before. Now, healthcare is always characterized by asymmetric information because it is evidence-based. It's also highly specialized, highly skilled, and we rely on experts like Samir with clinical training to help us discern between what's trustworthy and what's not. The challenge that we have here, and a challenge I actually think digital can help address and fix, is that information is coming down the pike at a speed that we've never experienced before, right? So we think about, an oncologist at a freestanding practice in a rural area in America, and they're managing the 13 major cancers, all of the rare cancers for their entire community. There's no way that they're reading, oncology every Saturday morning. They don't have time. They're trying to catch up on their notes from the week, right? So that's a way that digital can help. But, we can't also expect every highly trained clinician to also have the equivalent of a PhD in computer science. Nor can we actually expect that the brilliant tech innovators coming in with the capabilities to offer us solutions have an MD with a companion MPH with a focus on regulatory science, right? That's also not reasonable. So I think one of the things that we've tried to do at Dime as an organization, and I think the fact that everyone on the line here is an important constituent at Dime and has very different backgrounds sort of shows that the multi-stakeholder approach is the only way we're going to get this done. And then to get to the Dime Seal, in, I think, lay terms, the best way I can describe it is it's essentially consumer reports, right? It's an evaluation for digital health software products. And that does a couple of things for us. First of all, digital health software products, as we've defined them for the purposes of the seal, run the gamut from patient-facing wellness products to patient-facing medical devices like a digital therapeutic, through the sorts of platforms and products that sit at the interface of clinical care and the patient experience, all the way through to those products that sit almost exclusively within the clinic or the health system and are either directly helping the clinician, like a clinical decision support system, or some of the administrative tools that we're just so hopeful, I think, as a community are going to reduce the administrative burden for clinicians, help keep these sort of experts who have pursued a vocation in patient care, and unlock a lot more clinical capacity. And the purpose of the Dime Seal is to actually address exactly the problem statement that you threw on the table for us, Randy, which is in this world of asymmetric information and where we can't expect everyone to have the knowledge, can we very clearly codify table stakes for what it means to operate in this field? In this field, with whether you're a wellness device making recommendations on nutrition or how to manage your menstrual cycle, all the way through to making actual diagnoses, there's a level of performance you have to have, otherwise you need to get out of here, right? And so that relates to, evidence to support your claim. And your claim might be that you can reduce throughput by 20% in the emergency room, or your claim might be that you can actually modify a condition. But regardless of what that is, if you're making a claim, you should have evidence. We should think about privacy and security. And at Dime, we often think about sort of data security as a patient safety issue these days, right? Because of the harm that it can do to the patient themselves, but also we've watched healthcare systems be brought down by a breach that they didn't realize they had exposed themselves to through a vulnerability. Patients waiting in that golden hour for stroke treatment, they were passed over, and then no one gets their sort of security system unlocked without paying a ransom. That's real money, and no one has the money to do that in this environment. And then there's the usability piece. Doesn't matter how good your technology is, if it doesn't actually work in a clinical workflow, we cannot burden our clinicians, and we certainly can't build the sorts of products if they're patient-facing that you have to have high levels of literacy or tech competency to be able to use. So the Dime Seal actually codifies what does it actually mean to be acceptable in the healthcare sort of environment. It makes it clear, it's very transparent, and then it allows developers to differentiate themselves against this set of benchmarks And it allows the sort of decision makers to say, we are going to de-risk the decision making around our digital health software purchases, because we are going to narrow the top of the funnel only to those products that we know to have quality and trustworthiness. They've done a level of evaluation for us, and now we can focus our efforts on fit for purpose for our particular setting. So, if we think about the brilliant products that and the platform that Validic has, Drew, Validic was one of the first platforms to be awarded the Dime Seal, and we're really proud of that, because you've built intentionally the way that you sort of serve systems, clinicians, patients through the integration of different technologies. And then, Samir, you're on our governance committee, and you've really pushed us on making sure that this is an effective filter for products on the market. So we're actually solving a market challenge that exists on the buy side.
That's a pretty comprehensive explanation, Jen. Drew, Samir, either you want to add anything onto that? There's a lot of meat there to chew on. So.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, great explanation. And I think just to kind of reiterate some of the clinical problems we have, I'll cite the two specialized populations I work with. One is sort of those who are very focused on their health span, longevity, into peptides and hormones and supplements, adaptogens, et cetera, et cetera. And then also the devices. We absolutely use wearable sleep devices, rings, everything that's available to kind of give us the best snapshot of our patient's body biometrics, and therefore create the individualized care plan. However, when a new device comes online, and there's literally one we've been discussing in the last week or two, sleep device, and literally before we can recommend it to our patients, we're having to try it out ourselves as clinicians, as a clinical team, just to be like, does this work? Does it say does it do what it says it does? And I guess it's kind of fun because we get to try and experiment on ourselves, but that should not be how medicine's done anymore, And then the second population I'll say is sort of the special needs population. And this is, everything from nonverbal to severely autistic to, the Special Olympics athlete who's, very able to handle most of their daily living tasks. And yet, when I have something like, I want to use a CGM or continuous glucose monitor on one of my patients, like, can I? I don't know if I can, or if it's ever been tested with this population, or if they or their caregivers or those who run their home can even understand what some of this stuff is. And so it's really challenging, I guess, on both those fronts to figure out and procure and spend my time where I should be seeing patients, spend our time thinking about what technology actually works, does it do what it says. And this is sort of a way just to kind of bypass all of that, to just know that it does work, it will work, and maybe it's even been tested on patients with special needs or not. And that's great information too.
Yeah. Plus one to all that. And, just to bring in the perspective of, so Validic having gone through the Dime Seal process, one of the reasons why it was really important to us is that, frankly, it's tough for our clients, specifically health systems, to separate signal from noise, because a lot of vendors, they're not, digital health companies, they're not snake oil salesmen, right? But they stretch the truth sometimes in order to get the conversation, and that makes for a very, very noisy marketplace. And it's really difficult for our clients to even just kind of understand what they should be paying attention to. I'll give a really quick example of EMR integration. Most companies in the remote monitoring or management space have EHR integration in some way, shape, or form, right? Some are using Redox, where they're getting, or a tool like that, where they're able to have their data interface into the EHR. Some have single sign-on links, right, where the kind of launches into a separate system for the clinician, and all of that could theoretically fall under EHR integration. Nobody has that I'm aware of has the deep EHR integration capabilities of what we've built, where it's literally like a native-like functionality in the EHR for Epic and Cerner, and it's a really straightforward implementation process across hundreds and hundreds of device data sources that people could capture in their daily lives. Like that's just something that is very, very unique. But when you're faced with an RFP or something like that, and you've got a checkbox and like 100 words to describe what you do, like it's just not enough to really set yourself, far and away in advance of others. And so, I looked at the Dime Seal as a real opportunity to say, hey, look, this is an independent verification of the work that we've done, that my team has put in to make a really fantastic solution that enables clinicians to really scale these programs in the clinical workflow that they use every day.
So I think what you're saying is that as a result of this sort of cacophony out there of stuff of mileage will vary, variable quality, there's actually not just consequences for patients, there's consequences for the providers that the people with digital health offerings that we want to see succeed, because there's too much noise out there.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly right. And the reality, the sad reality, if you're doing something if you're developing a digital health tool that will ultimately impact care delivery, the reality is that the person buying the product is not the person using the product. And that's a very big challenge to overcome. Because if you focus too much on the sales of, what it means for the clinicians, that might not be the thing that the buyer, unfortunately, really cares about. But it is going to be the thing that's going to get your tool adopted by the clinicians ultimately. So it's almost like an initial sale, and then an actual sort of implementation sale after the fact. And they're two very different skill sets required to make digital health successful.
Let me add something to this. I think one of the things that is important here is that we have a regulatory paradigm for medical devices, but we also have a lot of things that are not medical devices in this space, right? And if you look at the medical device space, right, does the FDA or CMS or anyone care about, evidence, privacy and security, human factors, usability? Absolutely. However, if you think about how a medical device company or a digital health company approaches this space, right? There are folks who are like, oh my God, medical devices, this is so complicated. There's all of this kind of stuff. How do we avoid being a medical device company so we have more freedom to operate? Which also means that in that case, those things that the FDA has in place for evaluating evidence and for privacy and security processes, usability, et cetera, aren't really being applied, right? But then if you look at the other side, as a medical device company, people want that freedom to operate, right? And part of the process that they have is, as they are building devices and ecosystems around those devices, is looking at what is the boundary of the medical device, and really just being very tight about the boundary of the medical device. That EMR integration, not part of the medical device. Lots and lots of other things that are part of your medical device ecosystem are not part of the medical device. And so, those evidence and usability things are best practices, but the FDA, clearance or approval does not necessarily guarantee that for things outside of the device. Privacy and security, yes, because the FDA says, hey, if it touches the medical device, we care about it from a privacy security perspective, and you better have a really, really good process, documented process for managing that. So I think there is, this is something that if you are, just because something is a medical device, you don't necessarily have guarantees around, how it actually works in the context of use. And certainly for things that are not medical device, it is somewhat of the Wild West at this point.
Yeah, Bernard, I think you've hit the nail exactly on the head, and I can see both sort of Drew and Samir nodding along as well. There's a couple of different drivers that you've described really sort of elegantly, which is there's lots more sort of products generally in the clinical workflow, right? So, things that we may have been able to accommodate even, as recently as a decade, 2 decades ago, we simply can't anymore, right? We have to find that efficiency in the clinical workflow. I think you're exactly right as well at the sort of boundaries of the medical device and what happens sort of in the product itself, and then what's the wrapper that actually makes it really work and really add tremendous value within the clinical workflow or directly to the patient. And at what point do our colleagues at FDA actually lose their legislative authority to actually evaluate that, right? It's not that they're sitting there saying we're not interested in this. It's just, it's outside of the purview of what they're legally able to actually look at. And so when we think about the DIME seal, I think the ability for traditional medical device companies to actually be able to showcase the fact that they've done the hard work and they're not just best in class in terms of clinical evidence and security, but that they also have the ability to sort of fully integrate into a clinical workflow, that it's a wonderful sort of provider experience or a patient experience, depending on who the user of their product is. That's the absolute intent behind the DIME seal. And I think that's going to be really important to medical device companies, right? The example that I keep citing is, and this was not a medical device, but it shows a changing mentality within healthcare systems, is when KP switched out using Nabla as their sort of ambient scribe system and went to a bridge and did it overnight, right? When we're talking software, medical device or not, the switching costs are low, and there's going to be a level of competition and a level of turnover that I think is going to be surprising to traditional medical device companies. And I really think the DIME seal can be a differentiator to show that we offer the kind of seamless experience that we're seeing from the newcomers. I think the second thing is that with all of the work that we did in the year and a half or so that we spent in R&D on the DIME seal, one of the most important things that both the developer side and the buy side really encouraged us on was to avoid redundancy. So one of the things that I know that our medical device colleagues really appreciate is if, for example, you have a 510K clearance, you upload that in the evidence section of the DIME seal and you test out. That is more than enough, right? If that is what you have, that's fantastic. If you have a high trust or SOC 1-2 certification, you test out of the security section, right? You've done the work. There are tremendous certifications that already exist, and we will fully recognize those. But what I really like is we also wanted to be open-minded to the value that a high-quality earlier stage product or company can add. So if you don't yet have the $200,000 and 400 person hours to get your SOC 2, you can demonstrate to us, and we want receipts, we ask for all of it, that you are performing to a level that we believe is sort of the baseline benchmark around security. So it was built very intentionally to meet the needs of those sort of decision makers and buyers on the end, but to be developer friendly, because you know what, like everyone's working really hard and everyone is in pursuit of a mission of improving people's lives that we've got to be supportive of.
That's great. So maybe let's step back for a second. I think we dove into the conduit. Maybe I'm a device manufacturer. I have a continuous glucose monitor patch I put on here. I'm FDA approved. I have partnerships. I met the American Diabetes Association. I think I know diabetes patients pretty well. What do I get out of this? And then what would be the process for me to apply and do this? Like what's involved? Walk me through how do I sell this internally? And then what do I got to do? What's it take?
So a couple of things that are really important is the DIME seal applies to digital health software products. So we aren't interested in the interstitial sensors or the boards. But what we are interested in is the software that wraps around it. So if, for example, you have a patient-facing app that accompanies the continuous glucose monitor, we're really excited to help you evaluate that product and to show that when it comes to something like your privacy policy, that it's actually written at an eighth grade reading level. Not because we're here to be the sort of nanny state telling individuals what they can and can't do with their data, but what you are doing with their data has to be disclosed in a way that anyone can read it, understand it, and decide if they want to use your app. right? If you're doing visualizations of data, have you done it in a way, and this gets to some of the usability sort of aspects, that that meets the ISO standards for readability, right? So that someone who might be an older patient or someone who might have color blindness can actually derive the same value. If you are doing visualizations, have you been disciplined in terms of whether you are a regulated clinical decision support or not, right? We'll look at that. So these are all of the different pieces that we look at. And we have wonderful campaigns. We have a brilliant patient in residence, Grace Cordovano. We've done a ton of patient engagement. We do continuous patient education to help patients know that they should be looking for the dime seal as they're thinking about downloading an app from the App Store. And then if that particular product, Randy, is also intended to be part of a chronic disease sort of management solution, we can also help in differentiate that developer to a payer, for example, who might want to bring that solution into their wellness platform, right? We can allow them to say, yes, we do have good evidence that supports our claims. Yes, we're going to be a tremendous experience for your members. And yes, we are able to integrate seamlessly into your chronic disease management platform, right? That gets you a meeting that you might not have got before, because there are plenty of those sorts of solutions on the market.
I want to double click real quick on one of the points there, Jen, that there's a patient-facing way for patients to go on and see and understand what was DimeSeal approved. There's a physician or clinician-facing way for providers to see what was DimeSeal approved. And as someone who I'm such a big fan of patients being empowered with their own information, bringing it to the table, and so it almost allows for this shared, the onus of is this validated or not? It's not just on the clinician. I mean, a patient walks into a room with a new device I've never seen before, I'm thinking, what's the harm? What's the risk? What's the liability? I'm not thinking privacy, security, usability, readability. I should be, but again, don't have time and bandwidth to do that. So if it's sort of the shared way that the patients validated it by their own metrics that's important to them, I validated it by the portal and the metrics that are important to me. I think I just love the fact that it's multi-stakeholder facing, and it speaks to the whole asymmetry of information. This is symmetric information available to everyone sort of at the point of access that's preferable to them, compared to some of the other parts of medicine, which is completely just one-sided and only privy to myself or clinicians.
Bernard, you're on mute.
One of the decisions that medical device companies, or let's say digital health companies, face early on is, do I need to be a medical device, or do I not need to be a medical device? And there's typically sort of two factors that go into that. One of them is, hey, there are things that are absolutely clearly, this has to be a medical device. The regulations are very clear on that. And there are other things that are more, if we describe the product in this way and the benefits in this way, then we don't have to, right? And so that's one side of it, right? There's things that are clearly not, clearly are, and things that are really depends on your intended use. The other factor that goes into this, though, is how am I going to get paid for this, right? And for certain things, if you are not a medical device, there's no reimbursement for it, right? If it's not a medical device, potentially the clinicians won't actually say, well, I trust this, right? There's a certain sort of trust seal that is a part of that. And so there are folks that actually will say, I'm going to go in and I'm going to pitch this as a medical device to the FDA. It is a medical device. I want you to regulate me. And then as soon as they do, they try to minimize everything that means. They're really not doing it because they feel like, yes, we're a medical device. They're doing it for that trust seal. I don't necessarily condone that, but I understand, the dynamics that are going on for these companies. I think there is there is probably a better way of doing this, and not necessarily having to have something be a medical device for those purposes. Um, and something like the dime seal could be, as it gets more established, could be a good kind of middle place where you have the quality and the trustworthiness of it, but not necessarily being a medical device that doesn't really need to be a medical device.
But I think you highlight a real problem, and I think another example of where we see that manifesting, where we are already seeing the dime seal add a lot of value, is actually in the use of sort of digital products in clinical trials, so specifically as digital drug development tools, because as it's incredibly difficult, as we've all just been saying, to actually identify what's high quality and what's trustworthy, we're seeing a lot of life sciences companies say, actually, we're going to insist that you have a clearance. And it's like, well, but I'm never going to pursue that intended use. I actually don't, I may not even want to commercialize my product. But there's such an appetite for that sort of conferring that badging of quality, because there isn't yet enough expertise in the marketplace to be able to do it. So, I mean, that's somewhere where the dime seal is already, I think, showing value. We're seeing increasingly that life sciences companies are sort of looking at it as they think about digital drug development tools. And I think you're spot on. The other thing that we're actually doing, just as a brief tangent, is my brilliant colleague, Dr. Smit Patel, is actually leading a project in partnership with colleagues at ZS, PHDI actually, and a variety of different industry folks around what we're describing as sort of integrated evidence pathways. And I think, Bernard, this gets exactly to your point, which is what we see so often is a piecemeal approach to the different gating functions to commercial successful products. So anyone who's thinking, look, I need to be regulated, whether that's correct or not, they focus myopically on that sort of regulatory hurdle. Then they pop their heads up and think, holy shit, and I'm just going to say it, someone needs to pay for this, and I need to have a commercial distribution pathway. And we've seen organizations like Pear, right, do tremendous pioneering work, right, with the regulatory pathway, burn through $400 million and not have enough evidence for a payer or a commercialization sort of like strategy. And so what we're thinking is think really early on about what your product, like what's the problem that you're trying to solve for? Start there. Great. Do you need to make a medical claim to get there? Great. And whether you do, that's the right juncture. And then what are your commercialization pathways, right? So you could have something like a remote patient monitoring tool, right? You could sell that into pharma if you wanted, and you'd never need to worry about sort of a claim. You might want to put that into actual sort of care management, at which point, yes, you would need to go and get a clearance, and then you'd have to have enough evidence to justify, use of the RPM and RTM codes, and you'd have to integrate into a system. You might want to sell directly to a large payer as part of one of their wellness programs, right? That's an entirely different commercialization strategy and may actually beget a different regulatory strategy. You might want to do a few of those, but whatever it is, build it intentionally from the start. Build your evidence collection plan. So it might be that you can take your regulatory study and add 2 additional outcomes, and you've done enough to satisfy the payer community, or you do the same study but larger in a representative population, and now you're starting to satisfy other needs. So we have to think with the end in mind. And again, I don't think the seal solves that full problem. The integrated evidence pathways work is going in that direction. But I think it's a really nice step on your roadmap, right? If you're doing all of those things, everything that comes next is going to be easier. And I think with the benchmarks that we've sort of developed and then publicized, and that we're going to continue to recognize through the dime seal, it should be that rising tide that lifts all boats.
Yeah, I think it fits in nicely with those integrated pathways. Obviously, it it can be difficult and maybe costs more money to do everything, plan for everything, and execute on everything. What CMS might need versus what the FDA needs. But you are better off at least understanding if you are compromising, why and when, as opposed to getting through the FDA and then waking up and saying, and now we're ready for the next step. Oh, and they wanted this. If we had only known this earlier on in the process. I think the other thing that's interesting here is, if you, in terms of sort of pulling in other trends and pathways, right, is the FDA has a big initiative around patient preference that they are championing, and I think that fits in well with the dime seal as well, right? And it's something that I think medical device companies in particular are still in the early stages of thinking through, right? And I don't know. Um, I think some companies are doing a very good job of that, but in many ways, uh, companies aren't necessarily very good at thinking like consumer facing companies that really sort of take those kinds of things into consideration. They're very clinically focused, as opposed to end user patient focused, and I think that's something that again will be something that that this fits in very well with.
Yeah, I would agree with that point, Bernard. And just to extend that a little further beyond the patient, it also goes for the clinicians too, right? Like clinicians are consumers in their daily lives, right? And
Yep.
they have iPhones and the apps and the smart home devices and all that stuff. And then they go and they use the most god awful Windows based tool they could possibly see every single day, right? And I think that there's a big opportunity to engage clinicians as consumers as part of this too. And I think the Dime Seal is really helpful there. And Jen, you actually said exactly the words that were in my head, which is rising tide raises all boats. And that's how I think about the Dime Seal. Like I don't think it's I kind of talked about it maybe a little as a competitive advantage, and maybe it is for a short period of time. But the reality is, it's a signal that that Validic has approached this being security, integration, usability in a verified appropriate way, like in the correct way, if you will, right? Or in a way that has been able to receive the seal. And I think that's something that all companies should strive to do. Like it shouldn't be a competitive advantage. It should be something where like, hey, we as the industry are all getting better because now we have a standard that we can work against. And if you're doing the right things, I'll tell you from our perspective, it wasn't burdensome to get the Dime Seal, which I think is number one, fantastic. But number two, like it was because it was a verification of the great work we're doing, right? And so maybe when you're earlier stage and you haven't done some of that work, yeah, maybe it's a little bit more work because you have to put the things together, that you need to do, but it's going to help you get there. It's going to help you get to be a better system. And if you're already, in operations and in deployment, and you have deployments, you should already be operating at the standard of the Dime Seal. And it should be something that is a verification of that. So
Drew, actually, maybe while you're on that, you were involved in the design in this, but you were also a early applicant. Could you talk a little bit just about the experience and what goes through it? And also, I'd be curious for your suggestion on like in a device company, to the extent who would be the right person to own that?
Yeah, totally. So I did not help design the Dime Seal. I mean, outside of like some high level input, but like really honestly, that was Jen and her team and Samir over there. But yeah, so the application process was pretty straightforward. In terms of who owned it from our side, it was our COO. It was basically an aggregation of a lot of types of data that we already had. So it was, client case studies and verification of data that shows that our system is effective. It was uploading our high trust documents to show that that was something that we already have in place, which checked a bunch of boxes that I was very thrilled about. But it's by and large, again, it's bringing together data that your company, if you have operational history, should already have. And if you don't have it, it's actually something that, probably you should look at internally and say, why don't we have this? Like this is, pretty standard things for running a digital health company and showing that you're effective to both clients and the rest of the industry. So I thought that was great. And in terms of support for that my COO leveraged, outside of, I provided some humorous commentary on the background, I think, but he, we have a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, who has all of the high trust materials and everything there. And then we have an internal MIS manager, Management Information Systems Manager, around that works really closely with him to make sure we have the right things in place. But I don't even think they were involved in the application process. Because we have all the documentation and it's centrally located already internally, again, good practice. It was something that Brian on my team could do in a relatively straightforward way.
Anybody have a comment on who at a MedTech company would be the appropriate person to own this? Or have you had companies talk about, well, we don't have these pieces. How do we get the right conversation in place to prioritize these things? Because it's pretty broad based.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. First of all, in terms of owning it, obviously it needs an owner or a champion. The really nice thing about the DimeSeal platform, though, is you can actually add users. So if you didn't have a system like Validit did, where the documentation is centrally located, if for whatever reason you haven't made those choices, what you can do is, let's say it was even the decision of the sort of VP business development because they want to differentiate themselves in the market. You can come into the platform, and then when it comes to the privacy and security sort of section, you can add your CTO to the platform and tag them and say, I need you to address these questions, right? You could go to your chief medical officer and say, I need you to address these evidence questions. And then you could go to the usability piece and tag in your chief product officer, right? And you could get them to answer those questions. So it doesn't have to be particularly arduous. I'm going to print out a PDF and then I'm going to go around the office and I'm going to hit people with a stick to get this done, right? We are tech friendly here. So, that sort of very collaborative approach sort of really exists. And then, Randy, what that means for medical devices, it's going to align with the particular value proposition, I think, that the medical device developer wants to get out of this, right? If it's more from a sales perspective, then it might be someone actually from your partnerships team or from your sales team that actually initiates it and then goes and sort of uses the interface to capture the necessary information. If it's someone more from the product team who actually wants to think about, I want to go through the process to actually benchmark ourselves and see how we are performing against this and maybe identify if there are any gaps and if we do need to do any up levels. And again, to Drew's point about the rising tide lifting all boats, we very intentionally don't have a system where we have a list of people that we sort of name and shame who didn't make the seal. What we actually do is that we're investing in staff who actually go back, and if someone's struggling, that they can actually coach them on how you can meet that standard. So we have a lot of technologies right now who are in the system who are working through amendments to privacy policies, or whose security is actually sort of aggressive to the point where things like text to voice functionality is actually wiped out for the particular app, which means that you're not meeting our inclusivity standards. And actually that's over-engineered, right? That doesn't have to be the case to still meet security best practices. You're not actually gaining anything from doing that. So there are some changes to the code. For some of the products that are embedded within clinical workflows, we've actually looked at some of the code sets and said, look, these aren't resilient over time. You don't want to be that product that someone embeds as part of a pilot. They do an update and then you crash the system. You ain't going to get an enterprise license. Let us tell you what you can be doing here. So it's actually a really lovely collaborative sort of process. And that gets to the heart of the matter of who might be the champion to push a product through the seal.
Is there a pre-submission equivalent for like we're going to apply for the DimeSeal, we want to run some stuff by you, like you do with the FDA?
There are some wonderful traits of our regulatory colleagues that we will always seek to emulate, and there are some that we do not, and that is not one of them. So it's a one-stop shop. If we want you, everything's sort of open access, come through the process. We don't need to have multiple tracks and make it even more confusing. Go apply for the seal. If you get stuck along the way, we've got a whole team who's standing by to help you, whether that's from a technical perspective or whether that's from a scientific perspective.
Just give us a call and we'll.
No, don't call. Go to the site.
Jennifer, could you characterize like where people have had the most trouble or where they get stuck when they get stuck? Is it more on evidence on privacy and security, on usability? Where, where is the biggest hurdle for most folks that go through this?
The two examples that I mentioned are the two most prevalent items. So it's at the intersection of privacy and equity, because we don't have an equity pillar. It's woven throughout. And we have definitely had conversations that are along the lines of, how could we possibly make this privacy policy any more readable? It won't meet the sort of regulations or state guidelines. We're like, yes, it will. And they're like, well, but we can't change it or update it because the FDA won't allow us. And then we get the little bit of, documentation from FDA, and we email it to them and we say, here it is. Here's where it's perfectly reasonable for you to go ahead and do this. And as we said, that's one of the areas. And then the code sets themselves as well, and really thinking about the impact of your product as part of a broader ecosystem. And people have been really receptive. I mean, I think it's been a bit of an eye-opener in some cases, but I think there's only one company so far of everyone who has sort of entered the process who's got some feedback and decided to abandon pursuit of the seal. Everyone else is in an iterative process. And that's hundreds of products right now.
Hundreds. Wow. Okay. So I think we've got more to discuss, but I do want to acknowledge for those people who have to go. Hopefully we've hit our key goals of helping you understand this in light of MedTech and think about how you can move forward. There's clearly a portal that you can go to for the site to learn more. Thank you all, and we will be reaching out to you. Feel free to contact anybody on this panel, and if you don't have their information, you can go through me. I'll forward you on. That said, I want to actually, I think it's great the collaborative process you're describing. I do want to ask a question on the other side. So the Consumer Reports metaphor is great. I love Consumer Reports. It's one of the only places where I actually go through the effort to get behind a paywall, like through my library, to get it, because the reviews are just that good. In the 1980s, there was a classic case from Consumer Reports. Jen, I don't know if you were in the States at this point. The Suzuki Samurai was a car that was, Consumer Reports, their bedrock thing has been the car, the annual car reviews. They did a review of this car, and they put these cars, they have test tracks, and they have standard testing they do. And you could see the video from this on YouTube now, I believe. It's, they did all the testing, it was fine. At the end, the guys on the radio are talking from the car to the back office, like, we're just going to take this thing for a spin and see how it does. And he gives it some crazy turn of the wheel, and it tipped over. Okay, they had a protector there, but it tipped over. So Consumer Reports came out and said, this car needs to be recalled. This is a fundamentally unsafe car. And it completely destroyed Suzuki's efforts to enter the US market. I mean, it demolished them. It became a cultural moment. I remember there was a comedy show that had a line that, like, part of the certification for stunt doubles was going to be that you had to prove you could parallel park a Suzuki Samurai. In the meantime, Suzuki came back and said, this is really unfair. And the criteria you used are something you use for nobody else. And the situation you put this car in is not something a car is expected to perform to. So could you talk a little bit about the adversarial part of this, or the potentially adversarial part, or the accountability part of this?
It's a really good question and a great example, actually. And this reflects a lot of work that we did a priori, to launching, to think about how do we make sure that we are net positive in the marketplace. And so there's two things. Using the Suzuki example, we're not going to go off book and suddenly toss in a criteria for someone that we're not going to apply to everyone else, right? The benchmarks are very clear. They're publicly available. They are, moving at the speed of science through the peer review process. So they will all be available at some point, hopefully soon. But they are already posted on the DIME website. We'll update them every year to keep in lockstep with sort of global best practice. There's not going to be a curveball. There's not going to be anything unexpected. So I think that's the first piece. I think the second piece is, this is why the way that we decided to champion those organizations with the DIME seal was to list those organizations. And, as we get more and more that are, a more complex, sort of easier to sort of search catalog for the end user, is that we don't want to be kingmakers. We don't want to name and shame those organizations who aren't yet able to meet that standard. That doesn't serve anyone, right? Let's be net positive in the market. So let's spotlight, champion, and celebrate those organizations that have met a clearly defined and stable set of criteria. And that's all we do. So we really look to sort of mitigate risk of unintended consequences in the market, Randy. And the example you gave is exactly why some of those practices exist within the DIME seal.
What points haven't we asked about or discussed that you all feel should be brought up? What's key here?
I had one, and so when you were talking about the um describing things in plain English at an 8th grade level, right? One of the things that is, I think, very challenging as software is eating the world, and then AI is eating software, and that this cascades into the medical space, is how we describe the use of AI in what we're doing. I'm wondering how much you guys have. I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, but how much of that is reflected in the dime seal now, and how that might evolve in the future.
Can you give me a more specific example, Bernard?
Well, we, for example, have in medical devices, right? We have AI algorithms of various kinds that are part of medical devices, that are part of the cleared process, and the FDA has um some things they want you to be able to show in terms of where did the data come from, how were the models trained, what are the kind of the limits of that, and that is frankly can be very difficult to describe to someone at a college junior or senior level, right? um how do you deal with some of those things as it gets more and more complex, as we, for example, end up having um more general AI, as opposed to sort of the very focused algorithms that we have right now, sort of uh, large language models and beyond, where we're going, where it can be very helpful, very useful, but there are also all kinds of um, risks and things like that, and things that people really should be aware of when using these things.
Yeah, I would paraphrase that by saying, do we really want a book called Safe Handling of Radioactive Nuclear Material for Dummies? At a certain point, can you only take things out?
Yeah.
Anyone we're asking to handle radioactive nuclear material should know how to do it safely. And if, and we got to figure out how to meet people where they are. So I think this gets to the heart of the matter of where the dime seal sits in our enormous sort of $4.5 trillion market, right? So what we look at is digital health software products across the entire continuum, from the highest complexity sort of AI products through to a pretty simple patient-facing wellness app. And when we think about things like evidence, we think about evidence to support a claim. And if you are a very complex clinical algorithm, right, then essentially we're looking for a 510(k) clearance. And so we are de facto relying on our regulatory colleagues to have addressed that piece. We also know that there's great work that continues to happen out of ASTPONC, out of FDA, out of organizations like CHAI, who are thinking much more, train, who are thinking about how are we evaluating these complex models. As that work continues to be done, we will be monitoring that in the dime seal. And if there's a point in the future where we do, I don't know, the dime seal AI in a year or two, then maybe that's what we do. But for now, we really are thinking about that unifying claim. And when it comes to evidence, we are asking for, do you have evidence to support your claim, whatever that claim looks like? So that's the one piece. And then in terms of, the privacy policy, that relates to the function of the tool and the data that you generate and contribute as a user, whether you're a system or whether you're a patient, through using that tool. You make a really good point, Bernard, around the sort of data equity and sort of data governance that might go into training and testing an AI tool. We actually don't touch on that. We don't look at the integrity behind the process of generating the product or evidence. we had to sort of set the scope somewhere, and those were our choices for now. But as you say, we're going to be monitoring this. It's very dynamic. We're going to be thinking about risk. We're going to be thinking about risk of harm. We're going to think about universal applicability. We're going to think about what other organizations are doing, and maybe reference some of their standards, which is what we always try and do as a first port of call with the unifying dome field.
Got it. Yeah. I think the one area that, and that makes total sense, sort of, if there's already work being done, and as you said, let's not have them do twice the work. If we can already pull particular things in, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's on things like explainability and usability, right? Where I think the AI is moving so much faster, and the explainability is very often, it's a black box and we can't really explain it particularly well. That is a big challenge. I think that's going to be, an area in the future where we're all going to be, having to figure out how do we talk about AI and educate patients, users, et cetera, about the good, the bad, and help them evaluate that. So I expect you may have an AI update to this coming in a few years.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, on this point, I mean, NIST is working on more broad AI standards that I think are going to be really, really important.
Yep.
I think it also, though, highlights the need for a national framework around AI and data privacy, and just something where we can, in healthcare and beyond, we can point to that and say, this is what we're all aiming toward. And that I think that will help answer a lot of questions. Now, will we be able to get there? I'm not sure, but that would be my preferred path, is to really have something that is led at a federal level, pointing to recognize global standards. And I think at that point, it'd be probably relatively straightforward for how the dime seal would evaluate products with AI claims. Absent that, I think you're right, Bernard. Like, it's becomes a little bit more challenging if it stays the Wild West.
Yeah, and I know there are things sort of, in terms of AI ethics, and how that is being handled. AdvaMed has some good policy papers and is trying to lead, have the medical device industry lead in terms of AI ethics. But I think there's, if you look at the AI Act in the EU, that is, much more far-reaching than anything we have in here, although it is in early stages over there. It has pretty big implications, and I do wonder, we tend to be more laissez-faire as in the US around this type of thing compared to Europe, but some very interesting things will be happening over the next 5 years in the space, for sure.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Just real quick too. So I think we're also starting to see, clinicians finally waking up to digital therapeutics, AI, and the implications they have on actual clinical outcomes. I think it's been a little bit loose around the edges and not really at the forefront, but now we're forced to face it. And from the many, many clinicians I've heard from, like, there is concern, there is fear, there is uncertainty, and it's not new. I think in all sorts of therapeutic realms, pharmacologic therapeutics, things like gene editing and novel biologics, and it's nothing new that there's something new out there that's kind of uncertain, that unknown mechanisms of actions per se, but the clinical world has mandated, and that's maybe the advocacy force that needs to come to a head there, mandated that it is explainable, that it is fully tested, that it is ultimately safe. And I guess I hope that the clinical world continues to wake up to this fact that there needs to be more of a demand that these digital therapeutics are treated sort of with the same level of rigor, and it's not okay for it to be a black box. It must be able to be fully explained to both patients and clinicians and institutions and payers, everyone, and sort of meet the rigorous set of standards. So yeah, I think we're seeing that more and more in the clinical world as all these national bodies and physician associations are starting to demand that of these products.
Interesting. This has been a great conversation. I feel like we've accomplished our core goal, and we're about to go into 45 minutes of really interesting deep dive. But I suggest we claim victory now on our goals, and we could schedule a subsequent 7 or 8 webinars. First of all, Bernhard, we want to thank Samir, Drew, and Jen all for joining us and sharing this. And also, I just want to say that I mean, there's a lot of people coming together to do great work in healthcare. I'm consistently impressed by the pragmatic success of DIME in identifying actionable, bite-sized problems and cranking out just deliverable after deliverable that are actually usable by our industry today to solve real problems. There's been a yeoman's amount of work in here. I'm guessing this actually took a lot longer to kick off than most DIME initiatives, but you know, we really wish you success with this because you're solving some really important problems, and we should all benefit from it as manufacturers, patients, you know, taxpayers, you name it. So,
Randy, I really appreciate that. We work really hard. We have tremendous partners. And I think the pragmatic approach we take is really because collectively we need healthcare to figure out how to embrace digitization in order for it to be sustainable over time. And I don't think there are many sort of bigger goals that we could have as an industry to making sure that we aren't just treating people today, but we're making sure that there still is an industry to provide care for people into the future.
yeah. Yeah. I think for the skeptics, sometimes the answer is, well, maybe this stuff will work, maybe it won't. It's like, folks, we don't have a plan B for healthcare, so we better all get behind the boulder and start pushing, you know? So
Yeah,
thank you very much,
that's
all
right.
of you, for joining us.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys.
thanks everybody. Really appreciate it.